There you go. Recording. Excellent. How's everyone doing today? Thumbs up. A little bit of mucus in class today. Stay healthy. Apparently flu season is like the worst it's been in 15 years, 17 years, something like that. It's a really bad flu season. So yeah, just be mindful of when you're around people who might be sick. If you're sick yourself, you might consider a mask, or if you feel crappy, stay home, recover. Give yourself the time and the rest that your body needs. Here we have, of course, Jasper and Jag hanging out up in a cabin in Lake Tahoe last summer. One announcement is for a talk this Friday, the second talk in the Philosophy Speaker Series. This is by Monty Johnson, who's at UC San Diego, who is an ancient philosopher. So he studies the work of ancient Greek philosophers. The title of the talk is a little long, A Reconstruction of Aristotle's Lost Work, the Protrepticus, Exhortation to Philosophy as a Dialogue. The significance here, if maybe you've taken Intro to Philosophy, or maybe if you've ever had a chance to read works by Plato, you might be aware that Plato, the works that we have that survive from Plato are generally written as dialogues or conversations involving multiple people. These weren't like recordings of actual conversations. It's more like sort of philosophical arguments presented in the form of conversations between multiple people. Aristotle was sort of the successor to Plato in certain respects, lived just after Plato, and is generally considered sort of the third major ancient Greek philosopher. The thing about Aristotle is that we don't have much that he wrote himself. Most of what we have from Aristotle are lecture notes collected by his students. We know from references that he wrote dialogues like Plato did, but we don't really have the details on them. So this project that Dr. Johnson is going to be talking about on Friday is reconstructing the main lines of argument, maybe the main characters, in one of these dialogues. So it's an interesting work in kind of recovering this lost text from ancient Greece, which apparently is about like the value of philosophy, what philosophy gives to our lives, or something like that. So if this seems like it might be interesting to you, that will be happening this Friday, February 21st, starting at 4 p.m. in Cobb 1, 276. So if you came to the last talk that was in this building, this talk is going to be right next door on the second floor, room 276. Any questions about that? Anyone have any other event announcements? Maybe stuff your club is doing? Okay. So last time, we had a very busy week last week. We were getting into mapping debates, where we had spent the previous week mapping single arguments. Now we're mapping debates, an exchange of arguments from multiple points of view. We talked a bit about what makes for a good, productive debate, and this led to what I'm going to call a meta-debate, that is a debate about debate, over this question: whether good, productive debate requires consensus or understanding in order to be good and productive. From there, I introduced the difficult conversation assignment. We ran out of time a little bit at the very end for you all to find your partners, and at least 2 people said that they weren't able to meet with their partners. So at the end of class today, I'm going to do another 5 minutes, and that won't be quite as packed because it'll be easier for me to break things up than it was when I was introducing the assignment. So you will have another opportunity today to meet up with your partners for that assignment. I don't think I saw any overall questions, like any common questions in the 2-sentence papers, but does anyone have anything left over from last week? Okay, so this week we're going to be focusing on working with found arguments. All of the arguments that we've been looking at so far are what I call contrived arguments. Contrived, dictionary definition, means created in a deliberate rather than natural or spontaneous way. So all of the arguments that we've looked at the first several weeks of class have been contrived in this sense in either or both of two ways. First, they've been designed to illustrate a concept or technique. So like a lot of the arguments I give you about my cats, for example, these are things that I wrote, and I wrote them to illustrate the particular concept or the particular technique that we're working on when we introduce them. Other arguments we've been looking at are paraphrased or simplified versions of kind of complex arguments you might find out in the real world, and they've been paraphrased and simplified in order to make them easier to work with, right? So rather than, you're going to see, giving you some kind of complex, not particularly clear argument, and then draw an argument map, I give you a pre-cleaned, pre-processed, pre-digested argument that's easier to draw the argument map for, so you can practice with that first. So now that we have sort of those skills in analyzing arguments in terms of premises and conclusions and arranging things into argument maps, we're going to develop some skills in working with all of the arguments you will actually encounter outside of the context of stuff that I have manufactured or contrived for this class. You may have already begun to notice that arguments are ubiquitous. Remember, we're defining an argument just as a set of reasons why you should do something or accept a claim. And we are constantly doing this with each other. Particularly, how do I want to phrase this? If you're looking for an argument for this class, so a lot of the assignments in the rest of the semester, you will have to go and find an argument. Good places to look for those include social media. This includes video-based sites. I'm actually going to have a quick little example of a YouTube short that makes an argument in like 20 seconds. It's not a particularly complicated argument, but it is an argument that you might analyze for certain purposes in this class. Social media. This is probably the place, I'm guessing, where most of you encounter arguments most of the time is your interactions with people on social media. Blogs, newsletters, opinion sections of news sites. Kind of pre-social media, pre-internet versions of critical thinking classes focused a lot on opinion sections of newspapers, editorials, and op-eds as a place to get examples of real-world arguments. These days, we can find similar sorts of styles of arguments presented in blogs, in newsletters, which are just blogs which are sent to your email inbox, along with opinion sections of news sites. Podcasts are often kind of longer form spoken versions of the kind of material you get in blogs, newsletters, and opinion sections, and so that can be a good place to go. But also potentially conversations you have with people. The difficult conversation argument in some sense is you working with your partner to develop and clarify arguments for your position and challenging their position. You can also look at readings in other classes. So if you're looking, for example, at a textbook in another class, it's probably giving you an argument why you should believe certain claims or understand, say, a physics problem in a certain way. Those are arguments, and you might potentially analyze those for purposes in this class. So there are lots of places you can look around to find arguments. I wanted to offer some particular resources that might be especially useful for the specific kinds of arguments we are going to be analyzing later in the semester. This site here, The Conversation, is a site where academics in a variety of different countries, so this is the US, but a variety of different countries, academics write short essays on their research for members of the general public. So if you're looking for something like a piece by an expert making an argument, this could be a good place to look. If you want to access, say, the opinion section of the New York Times, go over here. So the New York Times has a section labeled opinion right up at the top. Regular columnists, a variety of different kinds of opinion pieces by other groups of authors. Very good resources here for finding these examples. But you need a subscription to access them in general. Unfortunately, we don't have a campus subscription for things like the Los Angeles Times or the San Francisco Chronicle, which are sort of the two big newspapers in California. But you can get access to the New York Times through a campus subscription. So if you're interested in looking for arguments in the New York Times, this can be a way to get free access to look at that. Another really useful resource if you want to work with video is this thing called the YouTube transcript extractor. And I just found this real quick through a web search. I don't use TikTok myself, but if you wanted to use TikTok and you wanted to extract the transcript of a TikTok video, I did another web search and it seemed like there were a dozen sites that provided similar things for TikTok. So if you're working with video, it's really good to extract the transcript. And on the next slide, I'm going to do a quick example of what this looks like, how this works. And then a general resource, a general approach to screening potential arguments. So starting actually in a few minutes, you're going to be, throughout the semester, you're going to be trying to find examples of particular kinds of arguments to analyze for your work for this class. This can take some time, and so it's good to have kind of a technique to help you look through lots of potential arguments quickly to figure out whether or not they're going to work for you. So here, step by step, is a recommended approach. So first, if it's a video, switch to this transcript because you can skim a transcript much faster than even watching a video at like 2x speed. Then skim the piece, and you're looking to answer this question. Does this argument have identifiable premises and conclusions? If you can identify premises and conclusions for this potential argument you want to analyze, and they fit like the particular kind that you're looking for, great, you're good to go. If not, move on to the next piece. Yeah, Devin?
When you say identifiable, does that mean it has to explicitly state like a conclusion, or can it be like an implied conclusion?
You're going for, can I figure out what the premises and conclusions are without spending 45 minutes and ultimately deciding it's not going to work, right? You might have to look through. So for example, when I find these kinds of examples, actually the example we're going to use, the TikTok editorial, I think I had to look through 5 or 6 potential things before I found one that I felt would be accessible enough for you all. That took me an hour. It's going to take you all even longer as you're just learning how to do this. And so the recommendation is kind of a triage approach. Start by figuring out quickly, how difficult is this going to be? If it's too difficult, I need to move on. So identifiable is identifiable by you. Okay. If the answer is no, this argument doesn't have identifiable premises and conclusions in a reasonable amount of time, just immediately move on. It's better to move on to something else because you can probably find it faster. If the answer is maybe, so this might be the conclusion is implied, and you need to check a little more carefully, skim a second time looking specifically for an explicit conclusion, or if you can figure out the conclusion pretty easily. And then, after you skim the second time, if you're still not sure, you want to move on to the next piece because you sort of spent enough time on this one. It seems like this is going to be too difficult. Better to check for something else. Okay. That was very abstract. We'll put this a little bit more into practice, but I wanted to do a quick aside on this YouTube transcript extractor for you all. So here's a YouTube short.
Do not use ChatGPT to write essays. Here's why. AI detection is becoming increasingly prevalent. AI models are being trained specifically to combat large language models like ChatGPT. These, in combination with some basic deduction by a teacher or a professor, can end up getting you into big trouble.
Okay. So we have this short that makes an argument against using ChatGPT. To extract the transcript, we will copy and paste the whole URL for the video. I've actually done that. It takes a few seconds for this to download the transcript, but you just paste it in and you get the transcript right here. Let me zoom in a little bit more. So here's the transcript that it's generated, and you can hit copy. And I just pasted it right here. Couple things to notice. This doesn't do capitalization. It doesn't do punctuation pretty much at all. So you would want to, if you go on to analyze this, you would want to clean that up to make it easier to read. There are also things like voice recognition errors, like right here. Instead of ChatGPT, it transcribes it as GBT. So you'll want to do a little bit of cleanup with the transcript, but you've got this, which is something that you can like copy and paste with a little bit of cleanup directly into an assignment where you're being asked to like give the prose version of an argument. A notable feature of this is this LLM-based summarized transcript feature. This is actually kind of funny because the original transcript is only something like maybe 50 words. This will create a 500-word summary that is much longer and much more complex than the original video. I find that amusing. Right now, the class LLM policy is not allowed to use this summary feature on any of your assignments. That will potentially change next week, and that decision will be up to you all. So next week, as a class, you will be setting class policies on the use of LLMs when they're appropriate versus inappropriate. So that could potentially change next week. But for now, we're not using them. Okay. Any questions about all of this kind of abstract, general, not immediately useful stuff? Devin?
If you're doing like a long form
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in the section on looking at the forest and looking at the trees. Yeah. Other questions? Okay. So we are going to be working with this op-ed as an example. You've got a link here to a polished version, free of the paywall. If you want to read the original, this was originally an opinion piece by the Washington Post editorial board from a few weeks ago. You can read this version, and it's the exact same thing. It's just got like some extra stuff in its paywall. So this is, again, an opinion piece by the Washington Post editorial board from a few weeks ago with the title, "TikTok Should Be Shut Down." As a preliminary question, before we break up into groups, does anyone need context on this issue of TikTok being banned or sold? Is anyone unfamiliar with that? Everyone here is addicted to TikTok and very familiar with it, I take it.
I've never used it, but I'm
Familiar with the news. Okay, cool. That saves us a few minutes. So, what I'd like you to do, first individually, skim the piece and apply this question from back here. Does this argument have identifiable premises and conclusions? So start individually thinking through that on your own. It's okay if you haven't read this before. That can actually be kind of useful because this will help you practice. I'm looking at a piece cold, trying to figure out if it's a good argument for me to analyze. So, first question individually, does this argument have identifiable premises and conclusions? Then, after a few minutes, when everyone in your table has had a chance to do that, move to these two questions. Can you identify a statement, a single explicit sentence, with the overall conclusion of the piece, and then a relatively clear, relatively identifiable argument in 1 to 2 particular paragraphs? Not, oh, I see right away, not necessarily, I see right away how to put this in premise conclusion form, but this seems like 1 to 2 paragraphs, I could work on this and put this into premise conclusion form, and it would support the conclusion. Okay, so first, skim on your own. Can you pick out identifiable premises and conclusions? And then as a group, try to identify the overall conclusion and 1 or 2 paragraphs that give an argument for it. Is that clear? Okay. Quick show of hands. How many people have actually read this already because you did the reading? Yeah, that's kind of what I expected. Thank you to the 2 of you who did it. The rest of you, you're going in cold, so you're skimming the piece, initially trying to figure out whether it's a good fit for you. So we will do at least 10 minutes on this, I think. I'll turn on the music. skimming, answering individually this first question, are there identifiable premises and conclusions? And then as a group, you can start talking about the two questions at the bottom, looking for a particular statement of the overall conclusion, and a relatively clear argument in 1 to 2 paragraphs. Objective smile. It's like I would hit the button. Okay, let's come back together. So, do we have a clear statement of the conclusion? Sorry, let me pull you all back to my screen. Ayush?
I think the conclusion is just maintaining the rule of law sometimes means enforcing those laws. The country might be better off without including the TikTok ban.
This one right here? Okay. So this sentence, actually two sentences, as a relatively clear statement of the conclusion. Other folks, other groups, what did you identify as the conclusion? I know you all over here at 2 had something different. Where was that? Was that further down? Oh, there it is. Right there. Okay. And I know table 9, you had something different, which actually matches what I decided to do in the notes. So table 9, what did you all say?
I think it was in like the second to last paragraph. Are you talking about that one or the other one?
No, not that one.
Like the rule of law.
Yeah. So what I identified as the conclusion was actually just the title. TikTok should be shut down. It's clear. It's nice, short, and direct. And for me, this nicely captures the overall conclusion, the takeaway message that the authors want us to, the message that the authors want us to take away if we forget everything else about it after we finish. That doesn't mean that other answers here were wrong. When we're analyzing a found argument, there will often be different elements of it that strike different people as, oh, I think this is the conclusion, or that's the conclusion. That's totally fine. Part of the challenge of working with found arguments is this ambiguity about exactly what the conclusion is, which version of the conclusion that might show up a few different times. TikTok should be shut down versus respect for the rule of law requires that it be enforced or repealed. These are slightly different things. And when we analyze an argument, I might hit on one version and you might hit on another version. Okay, how about a relatively clear argument for whatever your group said was the conclusion? Maybe, I don't think we've heard from 8. Did you all find a relatively clear argument? Sorry, I couldn't quite hear. You didn't settle on one? You
really settled on one entirely.
okay. What were some of the candidates maybe you were looking at?
The legality paragraph, the one that starts with the words the legality.
The legality. Okay.
Because it talks about the idea of having this postponing
Uh-huh.
ban.
Okay.
Is, a silly decision by either party, and that they should just bring it to a close. So
Uh-huh.
I think that was what we settled for the most part.
Okay, good. Other paragraphs that people were looking at? I know you all did this. Duncan.
Well, I mean, as for our conclusion,
Uh-huh.
it was just, the rule of law needs to be enforced.
Uh-huh.
There's a couple paragraphs towards the end that do state, basically, here's the consequences. If we don't do X, then here's bad thing that happens. So, for example, there's the second to last paragraph that
Mhm.
states, when companies operate in a legally gray area, it's bad for everybody because it undermines respect for the rule of law,
Mm-hmm.
bad precedents, and creates opportunities for corruption, and so on and so forth. So I think this is
Mhm.
an argument which is presenting there is a clear societal interest in upholding and maintaining the rule of law as a social construct.
Yeah, good. So in this case, even though that table and I had different conclusions, we actually identified the same argument. So if you read through the rest of the notes, I identify 2 arguments to focus on. One we're going to focus on in class. There's a second one, which I do the analysis for in the notes, but we're not going to talk about for the sake of time. But yeah, this is actually the argument that I focused on as a nice, clear argument for the conclusion. Okay. I think we're good there. Anyone have anything radically different? Any questions or comments on? Right now, we're just worrying about where can we find the conclusion, where can we find an argument for it, without worrying too much about how exactly either one works. And we can get reasonable differences in what we think the overall conclusion is, and which argument seems to be the most important. Okay, so moving on. Once you've found a piece that seems worth analyzing, so this one, the conclusion seems relatively clear, able to find some arguments that look promising for analysis, we need to ask, is engaging in this debate worthwhile? Is it worth the time and effort that it will take for us to analyze the argument and engage with the author? There are some cases where the answer is no, where it's not worthwhile to engage in the debate. 2 really important examples here. First relates to trolling. I imagine we have all encountered trolls, either directly on social media or indirectly watching someone else trying to engage with a troll. The thing about trolling is that trolling is not about producing good, productive debate. The aim of trolling is to disrupt good debate and thoughtful argument. The basic strategy used by trolls is to make you upset or frustrated through emotional language, personal attacks, inconsistent premises, making inconsistent claims. With the phrase that they use to describe sort of their target ending up upset or frustrated is triggered, right? A troll is trying to trigger you, make you upset or frustrated as a result of engaging with them. Trolls do this for a variety of different purposes. In some cases, it's a social engineering technique. So it's well documented that the Russian government pays people to use trolling tactics to disrupt political discourse in countries they don't like. This is well documented, for example, in this country in the 2016 election. Individual trolls often engage in this behavior because they think this shows that they are more rational or logical. This is deeply ironic because the aim and the tactics used by trolls are not rational or logical, conducive to good debate. The point is to disrupt debate. So the best approach to trolls is to just immediately block them. Once you've identified someone as a troll, immediately block them or ignore them and move on. Don't engage in that debate. It is just going to make you upset and frustrated. The other important case to keep in mind when you're trying to decide if engaging in this debate is worthwhile is something that's kind of tongue-in-cheek called Brandolini's Law. This says the amount of energy needed to refute bullshit is an order of magnitude bigger than that needed to produce it. So let's say you see a 30-second TikTok video that is, you know enough about the subject to realize that the TikTok video is completely wrong. In order to respond to that TikTok video, you would have to take a bunch of time to prepare a bunch of sources, do a bunch of additional research, write your own script, record and edit your own video, which might then have to be several minutes long to explain all of the problems with the 30-second video. And then you would have like this 5-minute video that no one would watch because people don't watch TikTok for 5-minute videos. They watch TikTok for like 30-second to 1-minute videos. So engaging in that debate wouldn't be worthwhile, even if, maybe this is even like really dangerous misinformation that you're trying to address. It might not be worth your time personally to engage with it because it just takes so much time to address these kinds of things. Okay. Any questions about this question of whether or not you should engage in a debate? Next, when we engage in debate, an important starting place is called the principle of charity. The principle of charity says that when engaged in debate, unless and until you have evidence otherwise, assume your interlocutor, the person you're debating with, 1, has common knowledge of the subject, 2, is able to reason well, and 3, is engaging in good faith. Or in other words, you should start from the assumption that your interlocutor is not ignorant, not irrational, and not trolling. This doesn't mean you encounter a troll or someone who is making false and apparently ignorant claims, and you have to act as though that's not the case. This assumption is what's called defeasible. That means if we have evidence against it, we can drop this assumption. Instead, this assumption is a starting place. We want to respect the people that we're engaging with, and an important part of that respect is starting at least from the assumption that they're not ignorant, they're not irrational, and they're not trolling us. And we also want to present ourselves in a way that supports the other person acting on those same assumptions about us. So we want to present ourselves as in ways that reflect the knowledge that we actually have on the subject, that engage in good reasoning, and that don't troll other people. Any questions about that? Sorry this time today is so much talking. It's going to be more interactive, I promise. Any questions about the principle of charity? Okay. So, now, with the principle of charity in mind, we want to start analyzing the argument. We can take two general kinds of approaches. One approach is what I call the forest. We can look at the whole piece, this whole editorial on TikTok, all together. We can think in terms of what is the overall argument and what are the general sorts of claims that the authors make to get there. Or we can take an approach I call the trees, where we're looking at individual arguments, often particular paragraphs or sentences. Trees really ground us in, there's maybe a pun in there somewhere. Trees ground us in the exact words that authors are using. And this is important and useful for making sure we are representing their views as accurately as possible. But one thing we'll see as we look at the TikTok piece is that it can be a ways between, there can be gaps between an individual argument in a particular paragraph and the overall conclusion of the whole piece. So, we can take the approach where we look at just the forest. We just think in terms of paraphrasing and summarizing the overall argument. We can analyze just one tree. We pick out one particular argument, might be a paragraph, might just be a couple of sentences. We ignore whether it has anything to do with the overall conclusion or not. We bracket the overall conclusion. We just focus on what is this particular argument doing on its own. Or we can do both. We can try to analyze a particular argument that supports the overall conclusion. Question: which of these approaches seems most promising for the TikTok editorial? Looking at just the forest, looking at just one tree in isolation, or combining the two, thinking about the tree in the context of the forest? Take a second, think about that on your own. So what do you think? Which of these approaches is most promising, is most promising for this TikTok editorial? Looking at just the forest, looking at just one tree in isolation, or looking at the tree in the context of the whole forest? Deb?
We think both.
Both? Why do you say both?
Because for this argument,
Uh-huh.
context is really important because it was talking about like essays and like an academic respect or like whatever else and not like for fun. And I feel like that's really important to the conversation.
I don't think I follow. Can you say a little bit more about your thought there?
Yeah, so when the TikTok is talking about not using like ChatGPT to write essays
Uh-huh.
because there's AI being designed to identify AI essays, right?
Oh, I was talking about the TikTok editorial, not the ChatGPT short.
The problem was the ChatGPT short
Could be, could be. Yeah.
I personally feel like should just one tree.
Just one tree? How come?
Just in general, how long the kind of thing is, reading the entire thing, I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, okay, good. So when we have, it's not a super long piece. The editorial is about 850 words, if I remember right. It's not super long. It's like a page and a half if you put it into, say, a Google Doc. But there are several arguments going on there. And for like a lot of purposes in this class, you just want one argument. So just look at one paragraph and don't worry how it's supposed to relate to the overall conclusion. Yeah, I think that can be a solid reason to look at just one tree in isolation. Duncan.
So in the case of this particular editorial, I suspect that, or I believe anyhow,
Uh-huh.
looking at one argument in the context of the whole case that's being made
Mm-hmm.
is the most useful here.
Okay.
And I would say that because I don't think the arguments are immediately apparent to be applicable to the overall conclusion and vice versa. I would argue that in the case of something that feels rather intuitive to most people,
Mm-hmm.
for example, if you were to make an argument about base level ethics, you wouldn't need to reinforce, why you hold a particular moral value because that's a subjective thing you just kind of have to assume that people also hold. So I think in the case of something that is a common understanding of people,
Mm-hmm.
it is less relevant to have to consider the whole thing as well as one argument. But in the case of something like this TikTok editorial,
Uh-huh.
if I just consider rule of law must be upheld, that might not be immediately apparent as to how or why we should enforce the TikTok ban. And if I just look at we should enforce the TikTok ban, it's not immediately apparent as to what reasoning is being used. So I think it's because this argument is disconnected enough from the average person's experience
Okay.
that it is relevant to consider the whole argument whenever you are analyzing one thing, because they do follow from each other, but I would not say they intuitively follow. Like without a background, you would not be able to connect. TikTok ban should be enforced to rule of law being upheld or vice versa.
Okay. So it's something about the stakes or common knowledge or something like that.
Yes, I'm
Okay.
making the argument that there is not a common enough consensus
Uh-huh.
on rule. It follows from rule of law being upheld to TikTok ban being enforced.
Okay.
Or you could just focus on only saying we should enforce the rule of law and vice versa. Like I don't think that connection is intuitively strong. Not that it isn't a strong
Okay.
connection. It's that it requires additional information that you cannot glean from just looking at one piece.
Okay. I'm still not certain I understand, but for the sake of time, we have to move on. So for this example, I chose to use the both strategy, looking at the tree in the context of the broader forest. Specifically, starting next time, we're going to focus on what I'm going to call the legal gray area argument. So this is an argument that I think at least 2 tables focused on. When companies are allowed to operate in a legal gray area, it's bad for everyone. So we're going to start with this argument, analyze it on its own, and then connect that to the broader conclusion that TikTok should be shut down. So that's where we're going to go. We need to, yeah, that is a thing we will start up with next time. Okay. For now, I need to make sure you all get 5 minutes to find your partner for difficult conversation number 1. wonder if I can make the font a little larger. I can. There we go. So it's a little easier to read. So we will do a quick round with names one more time so that everyone can hopefully find their partner today if they haven't already. And then 2-sentence papers as usual. Let's see, I think we started over here on Thursday, so maybe we'll start in the back corner with names today.
Devin G. Alexa. Dominic. Freddie. Eric. Jonathan. Nick. Devin C.
Shri, say your name.
Thomas.
Okay, so find your partner if you haven't already to coordinate to start working on this. And in a few minutes, I will let you know when the difficult conversation opens.